As John said, I worked at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and my responsibility was to be an ambassador and introduce the whole concept, the whole concept of the museum in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Europe, in South America, and across the United States. So, my father's people are from Oklahoma, as you'll see, and we'll learn about them. But in October, my wife and I, Karen Roberts Franklin, did a presentation at the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. This is the organization that Carter G. Woodson established in 1915, and it is now 105 years old. And they've been having conferences. And this Saturday, they're having their annual luncheon in D.C. My wife and I have a table. But my father started going to the association, as we called it in our family, in 1937 in Petersburg, Virginia, at Virginia Union. And he met Carter G. Woodson there. This is my father's father in Nashville, Tennessee, at the age of 20 on the left in 1899, and on the right, this is 1901. He's a junior in college at Roger Williams University, historically black college that I learned recently, reading an interview with my grandfather, that burned down, and then a white school bought it and built a white university on the location in Nashville where a black university had been. My grandfather, as you'll see later, moves to Tulsa, survives the massacre of 1921, and this is him on the right, in a Red Cross tent with his law partner, Isaac Spears, on the left. And the woman in the middle is an African-American woman named Effie Thompson. She had been a classmate of my grandfather's at Roger Williams in Nashville, and then went on and married a gentleman, and the two of them opened a pharmacy in Greenwood in the black section of Tulsa. When it burned down with the rest of the black community, she asked if she could become their secretary while they were rebuilding their pharmacy. So, my grandfather, as I said, moved to Tulsa and survives the massacre. We're coming up on the centennial of the Tulsa massacre in 2021. And there's a statewide commission that's focusing on how to tell the history. There are factions that don't want the whole history told because in it, airplanes drop bombs on the black community, burning turpentine bombs. This is the first time in my knowledge that an American city has bombed a black community. So Scott Pelley of 60 Minutes is very interested in my grandfather's story, and he flew me to Tulsa in mid-December to interview me about my grandfather and his life. My grandfather's name was Buck Colbert Franklin. He was named Buck for a grandparent, Colbert for a grandparent on his mother's side, Franklin for the family name. Now, we got into Oklahoma in the 1830s as slaves to Chickasaw Indians. You all know that the 5 so-called civilized tribes were slave-owning tribes before the Act of 1830, the American Indian Removal Act, which forced all American Indians on the East Coast, in the Southeast, in the Midwest, to move to what was called Indian Territory, when white people thought that that land was worthless. So they give these African Americans and Native Americans land in the 1830s and 1840s, not knowing that the reason certain places won't grow plants is because of natural gas and petroleum. And some of the areas where the trees grew closest to each other were some of the areas with the richest oil deposits. So they're farming, they're ranchers. My grandfather and his brothers and his father and uncles are black cowboys. And they come up to the Panhandle. They take their cattle to Kansas and to Colorado. So as a young person, he goes with his father all these places within Indian Territory and in the surrounding states. When these two pictures are taken of him in 1899 and 1901, petroleum is discovered. And Tulsa, Oklahoma becomes the oil capital of the world. And these black people on the eastern part of Oklahoma, just like in the Beverly Hillbillies show, become wealthy overnight. They have oil coming up out of their backyard. And they have to have a place to spend this money. And they come and spend this money in Black Tulsa, which is known as Greenwood. My grandfather goes from Nashville to Atlanta Baptist College, which we now know as Morehouse. And this is his graduation picture in 1903. He's second from the left with the glasses there, seated. B.C. Franklin, Buck Culbert Franklin. This is his first law office in Ardmore, which is south of Oklahoma City. And the men in the picture with him are other black lawyers in Ardmore. Right now, I'm in the process of reading a screenplay for a movie featuring my grandfather called Greenwood. And so on the plane yesterday and today at the hotel, I've been comparing the screenplay that this woman wrote on my grandfather with his actual words in his autobiography. So this is the picture on the cover, and these are other black lawyers. And he says in his handwriting, below where it says Law Office in Ardmore, 1910, my horse and buggy at the time. So that's my grandfather's horse and buggy in the picture. I wouldn't have known that unless I read the caption that he wrote in his hand on the frame of the picture. In 1956, my father's a historian. He's well established. He's written From Slavery to Freedom, a number of other books. And he is offered a position at Brooklyn College in New York, part of the City University system, to be the first chairman of a department in a historically white institution. Up until the 50s, our horizons are limited to teaching in historically black institutions. So he's taught at Fisk, he's taught at St. Augustine, he's taught at North Carolina Central, he's taught at Shaw, he's taught at Bennett, and he's taught at Howard. And then he's offered this position at Brooklyn College. This is 1956. He's worked with Thurgood Marshall on the Brown case. This is the beginning of desegregation in the United States. And so now Brooklyn College has a John Hope Franklin Day. And the first year they had a John Hope Franklin Day, they didn't tell me in time enough, and I had a busy schedule and I couldn't go. So this year we scheduled around my schedule and their schedule to do a presentation on my father's years at Brooklyn College. So here he is, a young man, he's in his 40s, has this job at Brooklyn College. The history department is still in the same building now as it was then. And I went to nursery school and kindergarten in the basement of that building. Get John. He needs to see this picture. So they posted his salary in the newspaper. Franklin gets $10,000, $11,000 post at Brooklyn College. They put his salary in the paper. That was a lot of money back then. Doesn't sound like much money now. But 1956. So he gets $11,000. And he starts traveling around the world. He goes to England. And he goes to India. And you see who that is sitting next to him? That's me. I'm 4. Going on 5. And my father is talking about going to India and talking to the other children, who are all white, about what India looks like. He brought me a toy from India. And when I went to this talk, I actually got a toy, which was a bronze horse, 4 and 5. It was too heavy for me to pick up. It has wheels. I still have it. It's sitting on my dining room table right now. School to protest these black kids being brought into the neighborhood. That's my mother, Aurelia, Elizabeth Whittington, in England. And here I am in my school uniform in England. And Dad with friends and colleagues in England at an autograph party. And when we come back, the neighborhood is hostile to black people. They've run our minister away from King's Highway Methodist, calling him a nigger lover. This is when you're learning to be Christian. You're learning to the Beatitudes. You're learning your basic Sunday school lessons. And here you have an example of someone not wanting the minister because he supports black people coming to the